Hi everyone, it's Vanilla. If we've never met before, welcome, and if we have met before, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a different video format than I usually do. I kind of wanted to talk about Scarlet and Violet's story without having to write a whole script to do that. So I'm going to just be doing a freeform kind of just yap sesh thing for this video. If you haven't played Scarlet and Violet yet and you don't want spoilers, you're probably not going to want to watch this video because I'm definitely going to be dropping a lot of spoilers. So I think that Scarlet and Violet's story is probably one of the best Pokemon stories in my opinion. The Scarlet and Violet story broke away from Pokemon's formula, and especially in the sense that there's not a main antagonist. Even Gen 8 had an antagonist with Chairman Rose. I think a lot of people believe that Gen 5 was probably one of the best stories, at least from what I've seen online, and I can see why. It was really the first game that Pokemon broke out of that formula where it was like bad guy bad and that's it, right? You had N and you had Ghetsis, and N, you followed N in his development as a person, and he goes from having this very rigid view on Pokemon and the relationships with trainers, and then towards the end, he kind of comes around and is like, well, okay, maybe Pokemon's relationships are different between different trainers, right? And so he kind of comes around to that, and then Ghetsis is just absolutely insane. So you had two antagonists, and you actually followed a substantial development in one of those antagonists that really broke away from the formula. And so if you like Gen 5, that's totally okay. And if you like Gen 1's story and you say Gen 1's story is really good, like that's totally valid too. I just don't fall into that category. I do have to say that I am a huge fan of Gen 9. I actually did this whole like spiel kind of thing about why I don't think Gen 9 is as bad as people say it is. And there were a lot of people who were not happy about what I had to say, but I just want to say that just because I really like Gen 9 doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge there are some parts of Gen 9 that aren't the best. I would say that Gen 9's story is probably the best thing about it besides like Pokemon designs, I think. And it's not only because Scarlet and Violet broke away from the main formula that I liked it. There were 3 subplots which really allowed you to watch the development of not only the player character but also a lot of the side characters. You had the entirety of Team Star, who their entire focus was on bullying and being bullied, and they were outcasts. And when you go through each of their stories, you get to see their flashbacks and then the flash forward to the present, and you get to see how they were outcasted and what it was like for them when they felt that they didn't fit in with their peers and all that. And I think that addressing bullying in the way that they did, which was very head on, like they were very clear that these students were being bullied, is a very important subject to talk about. And the fact that Pokemon is addressing subjects like that, I think is a really good thing. And then you had Arvin's subplot where he has a bad relationship with his dad. And that's a complicated subject to talk about, like talking about parental, like a fractioned relationship with your parent. That's a huge deal. And I cried, and during Arvin's subplot, I was crying. These were like, there were a lot of very emotional parts of the Scarlet and Violet storyline. There were quite a few times I've cried, and I don't think I cried that easily. And then you had the overarching plot when you first start the game is that you're supposed to be on a treasure hunt, and your treasure hunt can be whatever you make it out to be. It's your adventure. And in the treasure hunt, right, you have Nimona, who's constantly challenging us to battle, and she wants to get better. She wants us to get better so that way she can have someone who she feels can step up to her and challenge her truly and like to her full potential. And everybody around her doesn't want to battle her. Like at the school, you can see people brushing her off because they know that they're going to lose to her. So she really wants to be pushed to her limit and find somebody that can beat her. But when you do end up beating her, she is very humble about being beaten, right? She's like, wow, okay, cool. But there are some people in the Scarlet and Violet universe that need to be humbled like that and be able to take losing well. And we'll get to that later. We'll get there. But all of those stories were contained in the main game. And then post game, you have Area Zero, which is a totally different, it's just even more story. So you have so much to go through when you play the game. It is a lot of playtime. I think that people kind of underestimate how much content there is in Scarlet and Violet, and the story carries it so far. In Area Zero, you get more development of these side characters because you go with Arvin, you go with Nimona, and you go with Penny, and you get to learn the stories of each of them, especially Penny and Nimona, because Arvin's thing is kind of like the entirety of like the whole Area Zero thing. But You had Nimona, whose parents are rich and they kind of let her do whatever she wants. And then you have Penny, whose dad, she says, is very protective of her and that sort of thing. So you get those small little developments that really bring you closer to the characters. At least it did for me. And then when you're going into Area Zero, the whole idea is that Arven's dad, or in my case, it's his dad because I played Violet, but in Scarlet, it's his mom. You get to see, as you go from each research station, you get to see the degradation of Turo, right? Because if you know the story, I assume you know the story if you're still here, but Turo is an AI, and as you get further down into the depths of Area Zero, his personality begins to falter, right? When you go into the laboratory and you meet up with Turo, and you find out that Turo's actually an AI, it's a very fast-paced story development from the time that you meet him in the research lab to the time you get to the time machine. But I don't feel like it was rushed, and it was a very emotional thing for me. I thought it was, because Arven's whole thing was, oh, I never got to see my dad. My dad was never a part of my life. You know, Mabo Stiff was my family, and which is why the whole development with the Herba Mystica was so sad when you watched Mabo Stiff. He, you know, was not healthy at the beginning, and then at the end, like, you were like, oh my gosh, is he gonna get better? And then he does get better, and then it's a very, you know, good feeling. But Arven's whole thing is, oh, my dad wasn't here, and then he comes into where the time machine is and is like, oh my gosh, that's my dad, and then the AI is like, no, I'm not your dad. And he's like, but you look like my dad, and I thought you were my dad this whole time. And he's like, yeah, I understand that, but I'm not your dad. And then Arven was like, oh, okay. And it happens so fast, but you see the AI at the beginning challenges us to battle, and then we win the battle, and then the AI says, well, you know, okay, so we can shut down the time machine. But then real Turo made it so that way the time machine can't be shut down because he was crazy. That's the only thing I can think of. Like, why else would you have it so there was a safety to make it so the time machine doesn't turn off? That doesn't make any sense. And so then the AI gets overwritten, and then obviously we fight him with Miradon and Corydon, right? And then at the end, the AI transcends into oblivion and is like, I'm gonna go on my own treasure hunt and something, you know, and it's like, wow, you self-actualized. That's the word. You self-actualized and became an actual, basically like an actual person, even though you're an AI, which is that's again, another very complicated relationship to explore is, can an AI become a person, which I don't even want to get into. We're not going to even go into that, but the story explores that kind of concept, which is just amazing. So then at the end, every time I think about it, Arven I feel bad for him. That's like a very traumatic experience to be like, oh, that's my dad, and then not my dad, and that's an AI, and definitely not my dad. And this entire time I haven't had a dad. I would never how do you even recover from that? I don't even know how he moves on with himself. They don't really explore that, and I kind of honestly don't blame them, but it's just something where it's such a traumatic thing. It's like, Arven, I think you should take a break. I think Director Clavel needs to give you some time to yourself. So that's the base game, and it's kind of crazy how much content is contained within the base game. And it's even more crazy when you move on to the DLC and there's even more content. And when you go into Kitakami, right, the whole idea is that these villagers are concerned about outsiders because they don't want to lose their culture, and they also don't want people judging them. And they see transfer students and people from Paldea, and they think to themselves, well, these people are outsiders. They're not going to understand us. They're going to judge us and whatnot. And so that's a thing, judgment. And then it also explores concepts like xenophobia, where they're afraid to let people in, you know, into their communities. And so again, like, that's like a big concept to talk about. They address it in a very sensitive way. And when you get to Kitakami, right, you're introduced to the Blueberry Academy students. You have Carmine and you have Kieran. And Carmine is very apprehensive because she definitely feels the same way that the villagers do. And then you have Kieran, who's more welcoming to the outsiders. And so when you get paired up with Kieran, you go walking around Kitakami, learning the stories of Ogerpon. And as you go through and you learn these stories, Kieran gets closer to you, and Kieran opens up and starts sharing things. And it's supposed to be this very emotional kind of development. I personally didn't have that development because Kieran as a character to me is just I can't even go there. We're not even gonna go there right now. So when you get to the plot point, when you get to the festival, and that's where you meet Ogerpon, and Carmine begins the process of being like, once we run into Ogerpon, and then she sees Ogerpon, she's like, we can't tell Kieran. And so we then say, okay, I guess we can't tell Kieran. And as we're learning stuff from Carmine and her grandfather about how the masks were made and the story of Ogerpon and how it was shunned by the village because it was trying to protect its friend, Kieran isn't supposed to know any of this, but he inevitably ends up finding out. And that's like the beginning of his origin story, because he sees himself as Ogerpon because his own sister and the person who he thought was his friend are now turning on him and keeping him out of the loop, more or less, about what's going on. And so we move on to like the last parts of learning about the story of Ogerpon, and we meet up with Kieran at the shrine of the 3 legendary, whatever they are, whatever Monkey Dory, Okie Dokie, and Pheasant Dippity were called. The like 3 revered beasts or something like that. That's definitely not what they were called. But Kieran gets frustrated, expresses himself to us in a very, how do we say, interesting way, where he punches the shrine and ends up releasing Monkey Dory, Okie Dokie, and Pheasant Dippity, because the shrine was built because the villagers thought that those 3 were protecting the village from Ogerpon, but that's not actually what was happening. But then they're released, right? They steal Ogerpon's masks from I think it was the Kitakami Hall, and you have to go with Ogerpon to go get the masks, and we're doing this, right? The whole idea is that the protagonist is doing these things, helping Ogerpon get the masks back. And so naturally, Ogerpon sees us helping and defeating these beasts, and Kieran this whole time he's not having it. He does not want this. He doesn't offer to go help with fighting these beasts, and instead just expects Ogerpon to like him because he likes her, I guess, is the whole thing, but I just don't understand it. By the time we go to give Ogerpon the masks back, Ogerpon is more close to us than with Kieran, even though Kieran went into the village to explain to the townsfolk why Ogerpon wasn't the evil ogre that they thought she was. It still wasn't enough to move her to like Kieran more, which is what Kieran was trying to do, because he was trying to help out Ogerpon, but I think he was also trying to do it to get Ogerpon to like him, kind of thing, which I guess I can understand, but at the same time I don't, because this entire time Kieran's challenging us to battles, and it just gets worse at the end when when he realizes that Ogerpon is really not going to be with him. Ogerpon wants to stay with us. So he battles us, and then he loses, right? And he absolutely loses his mind. He cannot handle the loss, and you actually see right at the end, they really expressed his disdain and how much it crushed him to have Ogerpon not choose him, even though he saw himself as the biggest fan of Ogerpon. I think that's where my disdain for him started, and throughout the game, they're trying to say like, oh, Kieran's your friend, but I don't see the way he treats us as being friends. I wouldn't want a friend to treat me like the way Kieran treats the protagonist. I just wouldn't want that. I feel bad that he had his feelings hurt, I guess, but then the whole thing with him becoming the antagonist in Blueberry Academy, he treats everybody else terribly. He begins to treat Carmine like trash. He treats all of his friends at Blueberry like trash. The Elite Four, when you arrive, are like, you have to help us. Kieran's not the same that he used to be. And especially with Drayden, the dragon guy with the dragons, the Dragon Elite Four guy, Drayden was the only one who was willing to step up to Kieran and kind of challenge his perspective on things. I feel like the other Elite Four members and Carmine were all babying him, and so he was just able to run amok and just treat people like garbage just because he had this emotional like breakdown. And just because you are feeling bad does not mean that you get to take that out on everybody, especially people who are supposed to be your friends. You don't treat them like that, and Kieran is treating everybody like that, and he is especially treating us like that, and I can't I can't get my head around that. And so I don't understand. The entire time we're at Blueberry Academy, they're saying, oh, you need to help Kieran. Oh, Kieran, your friend is here. We're not friends, we're rivals, right? Okay. So I personally, since you guys are obviously now very well aware how I feel about Kieran, I was so vindictive that I brought Ogerpon out in the champion battle with Kieran, and I was so vindicated when I saw his face. He was like, you had the audacity to bring out the ogre at this time, and I was like, you bet I do, right? It felt so good to beat him. Maybe that says more about me than anything else. I don't know why I felt vindicated by doing that, but it made me feel better because I guess because he was treating everybody else so badly, it felt good to give him a dose of his own medicine where you remind him, hey, you can't have everything. This is the thing you couldn't have, and now I'm going to use it to beat you again, which I feel like really rubs salt in the wound. That actually probably sounds really bad, but that's just how I feel. You beat him as champion and he just doesn't, he takes it, but immediately we're rushed back to the classroom, right? And Briar and then Jita show up and everything, where we get the indigo disc and they say, you need to go back to Area 0. There's more there than we think. So Briar gets permission and we all go down. It's us, Kieran, Carmine, and then Briar. And Drayden doesn't come. I kind of wish Drayden came. I think that part of the story could have really used some comic relief, because Kieran started to get on my nerves. I mean, he was already, my nerves were frayed by the time I got to Area 0 again. But the entire time he's standing there around, he's moping, and then he has these, apparently they're supposed to be like glimpses of what he used to be. So you have glimpses of him going back to normal when his not normal was just verbally berating everybody and making fun of them and whatnot. So when you get to the depths of Area 0, everything kind of comes together. I really appreciated the continuity where they brought up, this is how terrestrial energy is made and everything. And I thought that was really good. They didn't have to do that. Like, terrestrial energy could have just existed, but they really wanted to add in that extra piece to really bring it together. And then when we first get into the depths, Briar reads, Kuro's research, and she talks about Terrapagos. And then Kieran, as soon as he hears about the treasure of Area 0 is Terrapagos, he's like, I have to have it. I have to do this. I have to be the one. And it's just like, what would you do if you couldn't do that? He has no plan, no nothing if he's not able to do that. He's so all or nothing. And as we're going through and we're trying to make it to the depths of Area 0, he's like, oh, can't have the protagonist doing everything. They want to be the main character or whatever. And it's like, okay, Kieran, you are projecting. You are so mad that you are not the main character and that we are the ones doing everything. Like, you obviously have a complex about it. And I'm gone about Kieran, but that's how well written I think everything was. He's so well written that it's so irritating. You know what I'm saying? He's written so well that it increases my blood pressure is through the roof, right? And you get to the center of the depths, and then that's where Terrapagos's gem is, right? And Kieran's like he's trying to pull out the gem, pulling, right? He gets it out, Terrapagos comes out, and this is probably where I was crying the most and where it made me hate Kieran, like actually hate him. Terrapagos comes out of the gem and imprints on us. They managed to capture imprinting. The way that the camera was shot and the way that Terrapagos looked at us, you could tell that it was like a baby turtle or baby bird or something. I don't know. Do turtles imprint? I don't know. But it's like the baby comes out of the egg and imprints on the first thing it sees. And that's us. It imprinted on us. And Kieran comes out of left field and he's like, no, you can't have it. I have to have it. And he just can't take it. And so he steals Terrapagos more or less. Against Terrapagos' will, he takes Terrapagos into the Master Ball. And when you beat him the first time, and then Briar tells him to terrestrialize Terrapagos to get the most power out of it, when the Master Ball broke, I was like, yes, perfect. And he tries to call Terrapagos back. The Master Ball just shatters in half. I was like, yes, finally. And so, you fight Terrapagos, and each time it's terrestrializing and whatnot. And the entire time, Carmine and Briar are like, we have to clean this mess up. What do you mean we? I had no part in in this, right? If we maybe took this a little bit slower and we kind of thought about what we were doing and not just throwing Master Balls at Pokemon, it might not have gone this way. But, you know, okay, I guess I'll clean up Kieran's mess because I didn't really have anything to do with this, but, you know, like, whatever. And when we get to the end of the battle with Terapagos, he just sits there and he says, oh, well, I guess you can have it. You know, I'm gonna allow you to do that. Oh, thank you so much, Kieran. It didn't obviously go well for you the first time. Obviously, you were trying to force people to be your friend, and you were trying to force Pokemon to be with you. And then the whole thing is, the more you try to force it, the further away everybody gets from you. And again, like, that is a huge thing to talk about, is that you can't force people to be your friend and you can't buy people's friendship. And at the end of the DLC, you have that cutscene where Kieran is more or less asking to start stuff over again. And he's all, well, can we just start over? And of course, our character is a lot nicer than I probably would have been. You know, they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. More or less, they don't talk, but you know, you get the idea. And they're like, yeah, we can do that. I would not be there. That would not be me. I'm sorry. I was like, again, maybe that says something about me, but you treat everybody like garbage. You would have to do a lot more to have me be forgiving you, to even start the process of forgiving you. He was so fast to throw that Master Ball. I guess Briar told him to do it, but why are we even trusting Briar? She is like the most unreliable person to send with a bunch of kids down into the depths of Area Zero. But if you think about it, that's how great Scarlet and Violet's story is. It's so complex, everything is intertwined. Sometimes with stories, I really want to get through them because I don't know, it's just not capturing my attention. But I really found myself in Scarlet and Violet on the edge of my seat. I was crying. I felt all the feelings that they wanted me to feel. And that is just perfect storytelling, I think. And it's definitely more than just the typical Pokemon story formula. And that's just what I think makes it so great. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I just kind of wanted to rant about it a little bit, talk about how good I thought it was and everything. So if you did make it this far, if you could please drop a like if you haven't already. It really helps me know what kind of content you guys are interested in. And if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. I make all different kinds of Pokemon content. And so yeah, that's about it. I hope you have an amazing day and I hope to see you again next time. Okay, bye!